Can you tell I am excited about 28 years later? Is it because I made another video? Well, yeah, Rage Virus is lit. And in my 28 years later trailer analysis video, I touched on some subjects that I felt like the series would be taking the disease in a few different directions. We have only ever seen the Rage Virus infecting Great Britain as it was slowly condensed to the Isle of Dogs before rapidly breaking out again to continental Europe. The massive cliffhanger of showing the Eiffel Tower only for it to go dark for 17 years still baffles me, and to see a more post-apocalyptic looking Europe supposedly 28 years later is even more eyebrow-raising. As most would note, the sheer unsurvivability of all the infected, who would all die out in a very short time frame, compared to the massive time skip we are about to experience. So is evolution possible? We discussed it last time. Can a mutation occur to make the infected survive long term, or can they learn to eat, drink, and or rest, and maybe even become quasi-intelligent? Or is it just another "we are the true monsters" zombie trope? Could a carrier named Jimmy from the first outbreak be what causes the infected to consistently be created and or evolve alongside making a cult around them? Will you find these talking points repetitive from before?
Then I'll just regress because I feel like I made myself perfectly redundant.
Yes, you have.
Today, we are discussing how did the Rage Virus survive till 28 years later, a mad carrier or an evolved strain? From the very first movie of the franchise, it's been well established that the infected can die of starvation, dehydration, and exhaustion in less than a month. So the only plausible way of keeping the Rage Virus possible is either through constant infection of healthy people, which is not going to be the case for a 20-year time span, or incubation of the disease in either carriers or biohazard containment by virology researchers and government entities. But how far and wide could it have gotten? With the first two movies set in 2002 to 2003, it's possible that the Rage's reach could have been the widest it could have possibly been by 2030. In 28 Days Later, Mark states that both Paris and New York have been overrun by the disease, but this was later proven false. More an unintended premonition with the horde reaching France by the end of the second movie. Maybe Mark's remark will be a foreshadowing of the world at large. It's possible with it being so far down the road that it most likely has spread worldwide in some form or fashion. The American military was involved in the quarantining and cleansing efforts of Britain before it was overrun again, so it is not out of the question that the US government did have a vested interest in the disease. I know, generic plot shit about using the disease as a bioweapon, but it's plausible that American interests would want to procure samples of it, that or a carrier to take back to the States and study, all to concoct a cure, since US medical officer Scarlett was 100% sure a vaccine could be made from an immune carrier, with carriers being a catalyst for what is to come. Although this is a reach, and the fate of every country outside Asia and Europe is unknown, instead putting Britain and parts of Europe on display. There is a reason I go into detail about other parts of the world and why the idea of a carrier is so important to the progression and longevity of the Rage Virus. The fact that we will probably never get 28 months later is saddening, I will admit. From being a fan of the series to wanting more lore of the pandemic, from just being OCD about the days to weeks to months to years. But with the trailer showing a family hiding away from the Rage outbreak and then being attacked, it's more than likely we will have an intro similar to 28 weeks later, where we will experience a group's perspective during the previous outbreak as hell breaks loose. This may even have a bit of overlapping as we see a horde of zombies or infected attack a church, which may be the very same church where we saw so many dead bodies and infected popping out of it, forcing Jim to run away. Hence why the kid that we hear is named Jimmy that was watching Teletubbies with his supposed sisters has his name etched on a building and then carved on a nameless man's back. This Jimmy kid could have been a survivor that possibly watched his entire family be slaughtered and infected. In a similar course of events, Jimmy could have been immune just like Alice in the intro of 28 Weeks Later, surviving the brutal encounter somehow and wandering the world all this time as a carrier of rage, shaped by the brutality and violence that had become the only way of survival, warping his mentality, not having much or any human interaction, and becoming the true antagonist in 28 years later, and being the main reason why the rage virus has survived for so long. The first outbreak was out of left field after Patient Zero escaped the Cambridge Primate Research Center. The second outbreak was a complete screw-up, haphazardly bringing people back to a highly volatile area that wasn't 100% confirmed to be cleansed. The continuation of and possible creation of a third outbreak stems from the idea of Andy Harris's escape from Britain. There is a certain insinuation that Andy and Tammy Harris's helicopter crashed in Paris, France, the same place we see the infected horde fled towards. It's possible that Andy survived the crash while Europe was beginning to see rage spread, maybe causing Andy to infect people accidentally over time, being exposed to healthy people and having them turn, or having to live as a carrier, harboring the disease and surviving both against the infected and rightfully fear-minded people. But honestly, anything to do with Andy and the characters from 28 Weeks Later is probably not in the cards for the third film and for the lore. But the reason I bring him up specifically is for his carrier status and from how his immunity inherited from his mother plays a big part, more so as a parallel with Alice and then this Jimmy fella we were just talking about. We don't see long-term what happens to the infected of the second outbreak. What we do know is that they were created from a strain of the virus that was incubated within Alice's body for over 6 months, only spreading out when Jim kisses her. Could it be that the rage virus being contained in a host body for that long could have caused changes or mutations? The infected Jim was obviously more intelligent and sentient of his actions, or at least he was smarter than the average rager. The same can be said for anyone infected intentionally or unintentionally by Jimmy. The third outbreak that we're going to be experiencing being one created by a single person exposed to direct non-stop violence and bloodshed in front of his own eyes and having to survive that world could create the perfect parallel to how the rage virus was originally created. A monkey that was forced to watch gruesome and violent media 24/7 like it was something out of A Clockwork Orange. He was possibly infected with rabies and it caused it to mutate, being exposed to all this violent, angry media. It was a rapid way in which the rage virus was able to evolve and mutate in its original containment at Cambridge Primate Research Center, with monkeys being our close relatives and with the testing lab being a condensed form of accidentally creating the virus. Who is to say that someone that holds the rage virus as a carrier would not be paralleling the primate that started it all? With humans being evolved from monkeys, who is to say that Jimmy and his experiences through a rage-dominated UK created an evolved form of rage within his own body? The evolution of the virus connecting to the evolution of man. The monkey was exposed to violent media, but Jimmy was exposed to a direct violent world, having to do so to survive. And with what is more than likely the collapse of society, Jimmy and what looks like a cult probably herald their own next step in human evolution, or at least embracing the brutal world that the rage virus created. The bone temple made from countless dead, healthy and infected, I'm sure. Jimmy's exposure to the violence while still being alive and immune puts his mindset into a possible survival of the fittest philosophy, forcing people to undergo subjugation of the virus or at least embracing the world they spurred, saying that infected should exist to weed out the weak. The incubation of the rage virus in him and Alice may have caused the infected to learn to survive long term. Since the virus cannot survive by itself long term, so cannot the infected. It needs a suitable host to ferment in to cause any notable changes, mutating the rage virus, surviving in Jimmy's body, and adapting for nearly 3 decades that could hold a wealth of possibilities that could make new types of infected, or at least strengthen and break the barriers of human restrictions. Jimmy is most likely the hulking beast we see tossing around armed guards like they were nothing. So maybe the carriers have no inhibitors that can fully use the rage virus to their own physical gain without losing their mind. Maybe Jimmy is going out looking for immune and carriers and declaring them as chosen ones. Anybody that can mentally withstand the strain of the rage virus would become a part of the cult. The masked cult members most likely being immune or carriers, spreading the virus to anyone they come across to see if they are quote-unquote worthy, to make sure they can adapt to the new world order of rage. As Doomfist from Overwatch once said,
"Conflict and war is the crucible through which we evolve,"
making a 3 factions war constantly raging between survivors, Jimmy's cult of rage, and the infected they leave behind and allow to roam the world to find more chosen ones. All of this while trying to observe evolutions in the rage-infected behavior, morphology, and more. I sincerely hope we don't see evolved infected within the 28 series. The infected being simple, ravenous, blood-spewing people is part of the horrific charm that makes it feel so much more real, and I hope it sticks to that. To have it go down the route of every zombie genre game where they have these mutating, where they're just kind of like transforming zombie types, would be a step in the wrong direction. The rage virus served as inspiration for Left 4 Dead's Green Flu and more zombie outbreaks, or viral infected types, since 2002. 28 may return the favor and provoke their own mutating and changing infected. Not to a degree like creating boomers and hunters and tanks, oh my! So not to see them sprouting new appendages or developing explosive materials like some sort of T-virus variant, but instead having them evolve in the more mental development term. While director Danny Boyle does not consider them zombies, the series and its ragers can still take notes from George A. Romero's own ghouls and how they grew across each film. Not exactly becoming friends with survivors or creating communities amongst themselves and empathizing with each other, but to make them more resilient, self-aware, or regard some sort of self-preservation to survive long-term, just like the virus did in the bodies of carriers like Jimmy. With time and carriers inflicting the rage virus on people, and maybe even caging the infected up, it may be possible for this to all go down, especially if afflicted areas are quarantined and walled off indefinitely. After the international incident that led to the second outbreak, countries may have just said fuck it and put up walls to prevent the virus from expanding and preventing all travel in and out, leaving the rage-dominated areas to be isolated indefinitely to fend for themselves. The original outbreak was already extremely fear-inducing. Every British person that was able to escape to the world was deemed a potential health hazard for how infectious the virus is. Even if they were proven healthy, the public opinion would say otherwise. In 2002, seagulls along the French coastline with Britain were gunned down due to infection risk through avian transmission. I mean, they were not wrong. Look how Frank got infected. Isolationism could play a very big part in the incubation of the virus. Much like Peninsula, as the sequel to Train to Busan, despite it being a very bad sequel, leaves a giant chunk of land to be eternally politically debated over the ethics of either cleansing the land through nuclear hellfire or protecting people that are still there, all while the infected and stranded survivors fend for themselves. This inaction could very well give the rage virus and its fanatic carriers enough time to make considerable headway, with 28 years later kicking off basically a revival of The Not Really Dead, with a sequel coming only 9 months after. That is still mind-blowing that we had a 5-year gap from the first 2 movies, and then a 17-year gap to 28 years later, and now a 9-month. It's just wow. I can see Danny Boyle drawing the parallel of Jimmy the Carrier and the monkey sprouting the beginning of their own unique brand of rage virus outbreaks, evolving the virus and in turn making their own brand of infected, and how the world they created would have to adapt, the survivors and infected alike. But that's just me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Chip in a buck or something over on my Patreon or YouTube channel memberships to be on this list here. Thanks to Chago for editing this video together. Support the channel by using code WOW at GamerSupps to get 10% off your order, and I'll get my own flavor and waifu cup to hopefully make it Left 4 Dead inspired. Until next time, I'm Zach Gass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay WOW.